自分の幸せのためにやってる意思が。普段幸せだななんて思ったことないんですよ、僕は。いや、そうじゃないの。そんなことを目的に生きてるのかなととても思えないんだけど。だって映画やったら不幸になるに決まってるんだ。
不幸になるんですか？
不幸ですよ、もう。ね。
Hey y'all, it's Miriam here, and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite directors, Hayao Miyazaki. Known for works such as Spirited Away or My Neighbor Totoro, the growing popularity of Miyazaki in Studio Ghibli, the Japanese animation hub he works for, has garnered the sense of being the Japanese cinematic equivalent to Disney. Miyazaki is widely revered as being one of the best filmmakers of our time, and he has been dubbed the auteur of anime. However, can Miyazaki actually fit into this auteur title according to auteur theory? Before diving into this question, let's get to know a bit about the man himself. Hayao Miyazaki was born on January 5, 1941 in Tokyo, Japan. Miyazaki's father was a director of his brother's airplane manufacturing company known as Miyazaki Airplane, and from this Hayao garnered a love for flying that would subsequently permeate the majority of the work he would produce later in life. During his later high school years, Miyazaki's love for animation was triggered by his viewing of Panda and the Magic Serpent, which happened to be Japan's first feature-length animated film made in color. He was moved to tears by the film, and that ignited a part of him that, quote, yearned desperately to affirm the world rather than negate it, end quote. After graduating from Gakushuin University, he was hired by Toei Animation in 1963. During his time there, he worked as chief animator of the film The Great Adventure of Horace, Prince of the Sun. Miyazaki ended up leaving Toei Animation in 1971, along with fellow animator Takahata Isao. Takahata would become a lifelong collaborator within the animation field, and the two ended up working for various animation studios throughout the 1970s. And during this time, Miyazaki created his first full-length film, Lupin III, Castle of Cagliostro. The success of the manga and film for Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind in the early 1980s led Miyazaki and Takahata to launch a more permanent partnership through creating Studio Ghibli in 1985. Over the last 36 years, they've created 20 feature films and several short films and television commercials. The first film they released from Studio Ghibli was Castle in the Sky, which then led to many blockbusters that would go on to revolutionize the film industry, such as the 2003 Oscar winner Spirited Away. The beauty of Miyazaki's work was recognized by American producers and distributors from as early as 1984, with the infamously edited release of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and came to a forefront when the 1996 deal was made for Disney to become the only international distributor of Studio Ghibli films. Pixar executive John Lasseter, a longtime admirer and friend of Miyazaki, was at the helm of the distribution of Spirited Away, and even headed a visibility campaign for the film so it could be included in the 2003 Academy Awards, which ended up paying off handsomely.
And the Oscar goes to, let's see, Spirited Away, Hayao Miyazaki.
It is evident that Miyazaki has had a long, strong, and critically acclaimed animation career. While perpetually being a well-respected artist and director within Japan, Miyazaki's international acclaim has grown over the past couple decades. This was sparked by the burgeoning growth of anime within the West, and more specifically the United States, starting with Astro Boy in the 1950s, the golden age of anime in the 1980s, and climaxing for Miyazaki personally with the Ghibli-Disney partnership in the 90s. As Studio Ghibli films became more widely distributed beyond Japan, larger audiences became enraptured by Miyazaki's magic. Within this growing popularity, Miyazaki was becoming widely recognized as a talented filmmaker, and with this, the notion of his auteurship became thrown around. Since he was an animator, could he be considered an auteur? Was his filmography coherent enough so he could be labeled as such? Before delving into Miyazaki's auteurship, I think it is important to discuss what auteur theory is in itself. Auteur theory is a theory of filmmaking in which the director is viewed as the major creative force or author of a film. It was the product of the cinematic theories that came from the French film movement of the late 1940s, known as the French New Wave. This theory was principally advanced in André Bazin's periodical Cahiers du Cinéma, with the aid of theoreticians and French New Wave directors such as François Truffaut and Alexandre Astruc. The auteur theory builds up on Astruc's concept of camera stylo, or camera pen, which basically signifies that directors should use their cameras like writers use pens, and as Truffaut argued in his La politique des auteurs, the policy of the authors, that directors who oversee all audio and visual elements of the film, 1, created better films, and 2, are considered more of the author of the movie than is the writer of the screenplay. Essentially, the theory signifies that fundamental visual elements such as camera placement, blocking, lighting, and scene length are more influential than plotline in creating and displaying the message of the film. The differentiation that makes a director an auteur lies in 3 key elements: the advanced level of technical competence of the auteur, the distinguishable style in an auteur's creative works, and the distinct layers of interior meaning within the films. So, in regards to Miyazaki's authorship, the one catch found within this is that the theory was based around live-action filmmaking, and so the debate around Miyazaki centers over whether he can be considered an auteur due to the fact that he is an animator. In my personal opinion, it is evident that Miyazaki goes above and beyond in fulfilling the criteria needed in order to be considered an auteur, and that the catch of the animation medium barrier is a faulty and outdated understanding of both auteur theory and animation itself. So, let's start off with element number 1, technical competence. It is undeniable that Miyazaki has great artistic skill, as he uses the traditional animation technique of hand-drawn cell animation, a type of 2D animation that focuses on line drawing and the importance of layering within the cell. Each frame is hand-drawn before being put together in order to create movement, an extremely meticulous, tedious, and repetitive process. Miyazaki is known for mystical realism within his animation, which stems from his insistence on adding frames in order to capture the feel of nature's subtle rhythms. He is observant, and he puts great thought and intention into the movement of not only his human characters, but the scenery around them. He will intently watch the way leaves rustle in the wind, or how a child will turn their head in order to mimic their movement in the most realistic way possible. Here is a small excerpt from the documentary Kingdom of Dreams and Madness that exemplifies this.
ちょっと今加藤さんが言ったのとても面白い問題があるんで、ついでに話してきますけど、礼儀作法で相手に顔を向けるときに横目を使いながら振り向くと怪しい顔になります。だからそれはこの映画ではやらない。人の所作が時代によって変わったんです。お辞儀の仕方も含めて、例えばこうありがとうございますって言ってこう戻らないんですよ。いいですか？今ここから僕が挨拶しますけど、ありがとうございます。こうやってちょっと戻して全部戻らないです。全部戻ったらってこうなって、これが無作法でぶしつけな横柄な人間になるんです。あ、そうですか。いつの間にか戻していくっていうわかる。それが日本の礼儀作法ですね。
Miyazaki does the majority, if not all, of his storyboarding, which is contrary to the usual large team of collaborators seen staffed on feature-length animated films. He maintains full control of the film beyond creating his own storyboards, as he reviews every cell of animation that is created by other staff members for the storyboard. He will critique and even personally redraw them if he is not satisfied with the presentation of his vision. This demonstrates how he surpasses the animation caveat, as most animators are not called auteurs because most animated films utilize a team of artists for storyboarding and such. However, Miyazaki is more of a one-man show by delegating less artistic control to others over the pieces he produces. He is involved at every step, as seen here when he critiques a voice actor for his film The Wind Rises.
君たちの荷物は君たちの荷物はそこの人、ここへお座りなさい。ちょっと失敬さ。
大丈夫ですよ。
いい感じですか？
いい感じかどうかわかりませんけど。
Miyazaki is critically commended, renowned, and well respected for his artistic ability, with even Pixar chief John Lasseter claiming he's one of the greatest filmmakers of our time. He's been popularly dubbed the god of anime, a title that is not undeserved. His popularity and the appreciation for his films comes from his skillfulness within animation, and so it is easily seen how Miyazaki fills the competence checkbox of auteur theory. Element number 2. Distinguishable style. Miyazaki's artistic style is very unique, and the fact that he's an animator allots him a special position within this element. Because his main form of artistic creation is through an animated medium, the way in which he draws gives him a discernible style. Just as someone can recognize whether a painting is by Picasso or Van Gogh by the way it looks, a viewer can recognize when an animated scene looks like Miyazaki's. He subverts a stroke's concept of camera stilo, as instead of the camera being like a pencil, his pencil and watercolors become his camera. His films have a bold quality that stem from how he creates his sketches, and his artistic presentation seems to be this combination of Japanese and American animation styles. His lines are somewhat lighter, thinner, and more emotive in comparison to animation seen from companies like Disney, and he maintains a more 2D look to his drawings. He has such a deep attention to detail, and while all his characters differ in looks, they are all similarly elaborate and realistic. Beyond his unparalleled artistic style, there's a thread of common features that makes these films so distinctly Miyazaki. The most prominently seen ones are young female protagonists, aviation, and unmatched imagination. The majority of Miyazaki's films are spearheaded by young and strong female protagonists, such as Chihiro in Spirited Away, Nausicaa in Nausicaa Valley of the Wind, Kiki in Kiki's Delivery Service, San in Princess Mononoke, Shita in Castle in the Sky, and Sophie in Howl's Moving Castle, among a few others. They subvert the traditional notion of heroism by having the main hero be a woman rather than a man, and add a distinct feminist quality to his films. These women are not frail and dainty like the usual portrayal of women protagonists, such as the Disney princesses in the films created before the early 2000s, but rather are these determined, courageous, and well-developed individuals. Frankly, the dawn of strong heroines in Disney films such as in Brave or Moana can be credited to the influence of Miyazaki on American cinema. Drawing from his family's involvement in airplane manufacturing and his subsequent fascination with aviation, this insertion of some kind of flying scene is another common distinguished stylistic choice of Miyazaki's. From Nausicaa taking off on her glider, to Totoro carrying Satsuki and Mei around in the sky, or Kiki flying on her broomstick, or Sen riding on a dragon's back, Miyazaki doesn't shy away from taking to the skies. He even has some films such as Porco Rosso or The Wind Rises, in which airplanes, specifically fighter planes used in World War II, are integral to the plot. It is honestly very rare to find a Miyazaki film that does not implement some form of aviation. Although not impossible. Shout out to Princess Mononoke. Now, the last stylistic element I want to touch on is the exceptional fantasy worlds Miyazaki creates. His power of imagination is unparalleled as he forms these intricate mystical lands and worlds that are not like anything else available on the cinematic market. Each frame is packed with such richness, complexity, and vitality that can only be orchestrated by Miyazaki himself, and he uses such grand displays of fantasy in order to represent his certain perceptions of reality. This actually leads into the final point in our checklist: interior meaning. All of Miyazaki's films are laden with a deeper meaning beyond the whimsical world he presents. Most especially, Miyazaki usually centers his message around environmentalism, pacifism and optimism, feminism, and/or childhood. Starting with environmentalism, it is evident that Miyazaki has a certain love for the beauty of the Earth's flora and fauna, with his movies taking place within these gorgeous landscapes. He plays between the ideas of living harmoniously with nature, as displayed in My Neighbor Totoro, or environmental loss and the negative impacts of industrialization, as seen in Castle in the Sky, Princess Mononoke, and Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. What makes these aspects even more distinct and nuanced is the use of symbolism and motifs from the Shinto religion in order to demonstrate these messages. It presents these universal themes through the lens of Japanese traditionalism, a lens not utilized much in anime at the time, and so, in turn, its employment becomes a uniquely Miyazaki stylistic trait. It mirrors itself in the appreciation of nature and the need for a harmonious and reverent relationship between humans and the environment. It is apparent that living in a post-atomic bomb Japan impacted Miyazaki's worldview in a way that geared him towards staunch pacifism, and that life should be lived with empathy and love rather than hate, which in turn augments his characteristic representation of an optimistic and hopeful view of life. He presents this in two separate ways, the first being having the main protagonist work to create peace in worlds filled with conflict, such as in Howl's Moving Castle, Castle in the Sky, Nazca of the Valley of the Wind, and Princess Mononoke. Secondly, he also represents this pacifistic motif through direct critiques of a World War II society as seen in Porco Rosso.
Marco, why don't you come back to the Air Force? I've got influence now. I could work something out.
Thanks for the offer, but I'd rather be a pig than a fascist.
And The Wind Rises.
Japanese boy. Airplanes are not tools for war. They are not for making money. Airplanes are beautiful dreams.
Moving on to feminism, this is linked to Miyazaki's distinct trait of utilizing female protagonists as discussed earlier in this video. The women characters take the forefront, and their worth or position in a film is not solely determined by their relation to a man or presence of sexuality. They are both well-rounded and well-developed, and displays of strength, intelligence, and independence are not commonly seen for women characters during the time of release of these films, or in animation at that time in general. Lastly, Miyazaki addresses childhood with a multifaceted approach by not only looking into the whimsy of childhood, but also the challenges faced in growing up. Films such as My Neighbor Totoro and Ponyo on the Cliff by the Sea deal with the magic, innocence, and imagination that are only found in childhood, while Spirited Away and Kiki's Delivery Service confront the transitional period of growing up and out of childhood. Miyazaki invokes childhood in order to portray the stark reality of the human experience from its very beginnings, and uniquely uses it to demonstrate more adult themes than would be expected of such material. Overall, Miyazaki is one of the most influential filmmakers of the modern era, and as such a well-respected director, he adequately displays that he exhibits the traits needed to truthfully be dubbed the auteur of anime. He has genuinely revolutionized modern cinema, and he will forever be known for his distinct style and masterful storytelling. Personally, Miyazaki will eternally be one of my favorite directors, as his works go beyond just mere entertainment and genuinely touch one's soul at its core. I will forever be grateful for and in awe of his masterful mind.